Story 1. To preface, my brother has antisocial personality disorder. People often equate that with psychopaths. It's a spectrum. Some adjust better than others. On that spectrum, my brother is a solid sociopath. In 2020, I found out I had thyroid cancer. Thyroid cancer is the kind of cancer you want to get because it's highly treatable, especially when caught early like mine. Still, I was shaken. I lived in a different state away from family, in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. A few days after getting a treatment plan, I called my brother and told him I had news. He asked what was wrong. I said I had cancer. He replied, "Oh, that sucks. Me too." I panicked and asked what type. He said pancreatic cancer, claiming it stemmed from a brief stint in basic training with the United States Coast Guard before he was kicked out. He gave an elaborate story about exposure to lead and other hazards, describing lesions, prognosis, and a treatment plan. I was upset and thought he was going to have a horrible death. I kept asking questions until he finally said, "Enough about me, tell me about yours." I told him it was thyroid cancer. They planned to remove the left lobe and nearby lymph nodes. If it had spread further, they would remove the entire gland and surrounding lymph nodes and give radioactive iodine treatment. He said at least it was the good cancer. After surgery, while I was recovering, his now ex-wife called me. She said he had been cheating on her with a woman he had lied to about having cancer. According to her, he had told the same sob story about cancer from the Coast Guard that he had told me. He never confessed that it was all a lie. I called him and told him I would not forgive him for such a cruel lie while I was dealing with actual cancer. Story 2. I knew a man who claimed he used to be a paramedic before switching careers. He told endless stories. Car wrecks, overdose rescues, chaotic emergency room scenes, all very detailed. Everyone believed him for years. One day at a party, someone had a medical emergency. People immediately turned to him and said, "You are a medic? What do we do?" He panicked and froze. He started searching online for symptoms. Someone quietly pulled me aside and said, "I thought you knew." He dropped out of emergency medical technician school in the first week. It turned out every story he told came from Grey's Anatomy, Reddit threads, and news articles. He had stitched them together over time. The wildest part was that even after being exposed, he still told the stories, only changing the endings. Story 3. After I had my daughter by cesarean section, my mother told me I had been born by cesarean section, but she had not. Story 4. My mother tells everyone she has a master's degree. She has taken art classes at a community college but does not have any degree, let alone a master's. She also claims to have a file with the Federal Bureau of Investigation and says the agency follows her and taps her phone. I am in the military, and she refuses to come onto the base because she believes they will arrest her. Story 5. I worked with a man who told me he had to get clearance from the president when he wanted to travel outside the country. He claimed it was because he held state secrets from his time in the military and they wanted to make sure he was not doing any wet work outside the United States. Keep in mind he was in his late 50s, horribly out of shape, and he had never been in the military, paramilitary forces, or civilian intelligence, as his brother revealed. I used to try to top his stories to see how crazy they would get. I wanted him to say he was an astronaut. Story 6. First she had cancer, which made her infertile because they removed her ovaries. Then she became pregnant with a supposed miracle baby but lost it after she failed to convince my brother to marry her. Then she had cancer again, terminal this time. Then she became pregnant again, another supposed miracle baby, and lost that one too. This was especially devastating because she had seen the fetus on the doctor's camera, and it waved its little hand at her. The 4-week-old clump of cells waved at her. This is just a small sample of the stories she constantly tells. Story 7. Someone once told me to my face that they had worked on a project for which I was the senior creative producer. Story 8. I knew a man who insisted he had been a roadie for Pink Floyd in the 70s, but he was born in 1985. Story 9. She carved slut into her own skin and told her boyfriend that her mother did it. Why? She wanted to get married. He took the bait. They told me this years later while still married, as a cute how we fell in love story. Then he texted me from a fake number accusing me of purposefully giving her a sexually transmitted disease. I am clean, and more importantly, we never slept together. Story 10. Not insane, but blatantly obvious. A girlfriend slapped me and, 2 minutes later, denied doing it. The sheer audacity. Story 11. I knew a guy in high school who was a manager at the McDonald's where I worked. I've never encountered anyone like him before or since. Whatever you had done, he had done too and better, and his stories involved increasingly famous people the longer he talked. The one I remember most involved weightlifting. I don't lift and never really have, but there was a kid working there whom I also went to school with who was built like a brick house. About 5'10" and probably 250 to 275 pounds. His arms were the size of my legs. He mentioned a new personal record on the bench press, and I congratulated him. I knew he'd worked hard and he was a nice guy, although we weren't friends. The manager, all 5'6" and 110 pounds of him, started bragging about how much he could lift, and he wasn't even using the right technique. The weightlifter listened for a few minutes and then told him that the world record was less than what he was claiming and that if he tried the lift the way he described it, he would at most give himself a severe intestinal hernia, which probably would not be a problem considering how full of nonsense he was. It was a mic drop moment. The manager walked off, leaving me with the braggart, who complained that he couldn't lift like he used to but insisted many people had seen his lifts. I just stared at him until he told me to go get more oil for the fryer. Story 12. My mom has gotten to the point where she genuinely believes her own lies. The most recent example was yesterday. Without my knowledge, she apparently told our whole family that we had to leave Thanksgiving early because I had to go to my boyfriend's family's Thanksgiving. Yesterday she asked me what time I was leaving. I asked her what she was talking about and she said, "You're leaving to go to my boyfriend's house." I told her I never said that and she argued with me about it. Eventually I said, "I have no plans to drive a quick 9 hours to visit his grandmother at the nursing home." He had gone out of state to visit her for Thanksgiving. Even then she continued to argue that I must have said something, because why else would she think that? Because you're a pathological liar and it was one of the lies you told to get out of spending time with your family. Story 13. On a high school trip to London, my brother toured Buckingham Palace, slipped away from the group, found the Queen's private chambers, hid under a bed as she walked by, then tied bedsheets together and rappelled out the window without being detected. We are American, and I do not know if this refers to something else. Story 14. He said he was going to China to distribute Bibles with his church group. When he returned from vacation, he told me he could not go because he had fallen down a slope and twisted his ankle. Later, colleagues in the department informed me that he had lied about many things. Story 15. I went to school with a girl who was a pathological liar. I am not sure exactly what disorder she had, but she claimed she had a record deal. Sang on stage with Ariana Grande, was in some kind of ballet fight club that she snuck out every night to participate in. Ran so fast. In physical education class that she had a heart attack and an ambulance was called. Was kidnapped and held for ransom, and alternated between claiming she was a virgin and claiming to have had sex with hundreds of men. The first two are especially interesting since she tried out for the school musical and was rejected because her singing voice was bad. Last I heard, she dropped out, became pregnant, and the child's father has full custody and has been unsuccessfully attempting to track her down for child support. I am glad she has no relationship with that child. Story 16. I dated her for about a year. Unlike most pathological liars, she kept her stories fairly straight among many different people until the weight of it collapsed on her. Then she bailed on me and the rest of the group and started over. In retrospect, there were plenty of signs that I willfully ignored. After the initial shock, we all concluded that we did not care and she was not missed in our lives. Story 17. At first it was stupid stuff like a 10-inch dick, and he eventually tried to convince me he was death himself. Story 18. I had a childhood friend who was my roommate for 11 months when we were in our mid to late 20s. The whole situation was insane. Besides strongly suspecting he was a narcissist, he was 100% a pathological liar. One of the most ridiculous things he lied about was his high school life. He claimed to have been a huge bully everyone feared and said he slept with girls who would not even have looked his way. He boasted about beating up guys, stealing their girlfriends and winning huge fights. I went to high school with him. It was all false. He cared way too much about fitting in and was a people pleaser. I do not think he got into a single fight in high school. It was odd for a 28-year-old to talk like that. The most disturbing thing was that he had an 8-year-old son. He told the boy those stories and encouraged him to be a bully. The child got into trouble for picking on and pushing other kids, and he was proud, saying the boy was just like his father, an alpha. Story 19. I've always been a car guy. When I was about 16, whenever I saw a cool car, I would tell my friends and we would discuss it. One kid always said he had seen the car weeks or months earlier and claimed that he or his older brother knew the owner and had driven it. Eventually, I started making up models that were never produced by any manufacturer, cars that did not exist. I would say I saw the new Honda Jinsen yesterday. It had a pearlescent paint job. Without hesitation, the kid would say his friend's mother had just bought one and had let him drive it to the store, and he would insist the car was very fast. After it happened twice, I let the rest of the group in on the secret, and no one treated him the same again. Story 20. In middle school, I was best friends with a girl who was a pathological liar. I did not realize it until she moved away. I asked her boyfriend if he missed her, and he replied that he would never date her and laughed, asking if I had actually believed her stories. After that, I checked a few of her other stories, and they were all lies. The worst lie I uncovered was that she had been telling people I molested her during sleepovers. I was so naive. Story 21. His family founded Rome. No matter what profession someone had or where they had traveled, he had done the same and had been there. He even masqueraded as a Tibetan Buddhist, wearing robes and all. Everyone who met him ended up hating him within a very short time. Nobody likes being lied to, especially on that scale. He was by far the worst person I have ever met. Story 22. He said his brother was killed in Afghanistan, but he had no brother. Story 23. I used to write a popular humor column at a small newspaper under a pseudonym. One time I was at a party and was introduced to myself. Story 24. I knew a girl in college who said she got rabies from a squirrel bite. She said she was attacked and bitten, received the standard preventive rabies shot, and then spent weeks in the hospital with full-blown rabies, which she said she had beaten. Story 25. A stalker had been following her and me and attacked her when she went to take the cat litter out. She did not call the police. She decided to file a police report the next day but did not want me to go with her because she said she had to do this alone. Story 26. You know those metal ramps you place your ball on in 10-pin bowling, the ones children use? A guy I worked with claimed his father invented them and sold the idea to an American. Story 27. We have a pet horse at home. He lives in the backyard, but you cannot see him right now. He is at the veterinarian, and because he is a horse, he is staying overnight and might not be back for a while. Story 28. The date on her passport was wrong, and the name was the American version of her Swiss name. This stands out the most. I was with her for 2 years, so the deception was constant. Story 29. In junior high, I had a friend who was like this. She told me she had a drum set in her basement. When I went over to her house, she didn't even have a basement. She wasn't very good at lying. Story 30. There are many examples. At age 9, she convinced a whole lot of people that we were having a summer fair in our front garden. A space only just big enough to hold a small car. My parents found out when people started showing up with stuff wanting to set up. At age 11, my mother spoke to her teacher after finding a weird goodbye note in her rucksack. We found out she had told everyone she was leaving for boarding school after the Easter holidays. At age 15, she convinced my parents that she did not have to attend school on Fridays for almost a full school year. She is successful in her industry and has managed to talk people into employing her wildly underqualified and inexperienced friends in jobs, most of which ended in disaster. About 10 years ago, she had my ex-boyfriend drive me 40 miles home on Christmas Day through an actual hurricane and flooding because she said the house was flooded. The house was not flooded and the boyfriend was spitting absolute fury. That drive was genuinely dangerous. It is mad that she still does it. She is almost 45 now. Story 31. A girl in middle school told a group of friends that she was jealous of our ears because they lay flat and she had to straighten hers with a flat iron every morning. If you are unaware, using a flat iron on ears would cause severe burns within seconds. Story 32. Tattoo artist here. I had a customer who told me she would attend her friend's funeral later that day after our appointment. She said her friend had been at a concert when a fan tried to shoot the band's singer. Her friend jumped in front of the bullet and died. We live in a small country with almost no gun violence. Something like this would have been front-page news for days. I did a few more tattoos for her after that. The first time she said she was studying to become a veterinarian. The next time I saw her, she owned a restaurant. Truly a bizarre experience. Story 33. I have two stories. When I was 14, I talked to a 36-year-old man. His story was that he had struggled in school and then been falsely framed by a drug-abusing college roommate. He said he had never used drugs before, but that now he was poor and could not keep a job or buy a house. I blocked and reported him because he had contacted me, a 14-year-old, but I did not think much of his story at the time. After I turned 18, I contacted one of his other former partners who was his age. It turned out he would make up or twist stories and play the victim to financially exploit women. He would move in with someone, refuse to pay bills or get a job, and spend his days using drugs or drinking. There were women who tried to kick him out and then received death or suicide threats. When I was 19, I was dating my first real boyfriend, who is now my ex. His younger sister is a pathological liar. When they were about 7 and 9, she convinced their parents that he had tried to choke and kill her. It took him up to a year to prove otherwise. When we dated, he and his parents warned me not to trust her with personal information about my friends or family. He was also toxic and dishonest in his own way, which is why he is my ex, though his sister was worse. Story 34. I used to work with a compulsive liar. Not all the time, thankfully, but often enough. The worst incident was when he told us his wife had miscarried twins. He forgot we had a social event with partners, and she was very upset when everyone started asking how she was coping. Story 35. Not sure if this counts, but I'll share. My late wife was a realtor and a closet alcoholic. She created fake showings and listings to stay under the radar and hid bottles of alcohol in nearly every house she listed. She lied about almost every financial matter, so I made sure our finances were completely separate. Story 36. So many lies. I'm still processing. I've got an international criminal police organization file, was probably the top one. He said he had seen spiritual entities, but when I asked for details, he said, "Not here," and refused to tell me over WhatsApp. He also believed he would be black-bagged by the United Kingdom government for posting a few pro-Palestine memes on Facebook. There is much more. He was a complete liar. Story 37. He sat next to Paul McCartney on an airplane once and told Paul about things he was doing wrong on his tour. Paul thanked him for the ideas and changed his show. He also said he was a motorcycle mechanic and couldn't find a broken wire right under the seat. He never had to lie. It was just an aspect of his personality. Story 38. She was a preschool teacher who talked down two belligerent parents who came to shoot up the school. She persuaded the special weapons and tactics team to stand down so she could speak with one of them like an adult and resolve the situation without incident. After starting a new job, within a month she again talked down an active shooter. Remarkable. Story 39. My mother had been ill for a long time, so we expected her to die. She told me she had written letters to each of her children about how she felt and was saving them to give us after she died. When she died, I asked her husband for the letters because she had said he wrote them as she dictated. That was a lie. I should have expected it because she had always lied to me, but I was still devastated. Story 40. I moderate chat rooms at night. I often see made-up falsehoods because people want to be someone else. One man appears occasionally and tells obvious lies. He came in last night and heard someone say they had just been diagnosed with lung cancer. The pathological liar interrupted and claimed he had cured his own stage 4 lung cancer by eating healthy and refusing all treatment, and he encouraged the other person to forego chemotherapy. He was removed from the room. Not only did he belittle the man, he gave him false hope and dangerous advice. Story 41. She claims she hacks computers for the Federal Bureau of Investigation to help them catch pedophiles. She says she does things for them that they are not legally allowed to do. I have seen her take 4 or so clicks to save a Word document. She is not a computer hacker for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Han. Story 42. A girl I was loosely friends with in high school inherited a mansion and millions in Ireland when an uncle died. But for some complicated reason she continued living in a council flat in Essex with no money. All her school holidays were spent at the mansion in Ireland. Apparently she wrote a best-selling book under a pen name and refused to reveal the title or her identity because she did not want the fame. She claimed to be having a secret affair with a male teacher, complete with falsified text messages and emails. She secretly had a baby, managed to hide the pregnancy, and conveniently gave birth during the summer holidays before putting the child up for adoption. When she went to university, she became obsessed with a female tutor and fabricated a story that they were having an affair. She created social media accounts impersonating the tutor to make the story believable, then used them to catfish other people. She was caught, expelled from university, and I believe legal action was taken against her. Story 43. A woman at work would boast that she was completely fluent in German. She would even switch the office radio to a German station from time to time so she could translate for us. Then the office hired a woman from Germany. Story 44. Plot twist. This thread is full of pathological liars telling made-up stories. Story 45. We never spanked any of y'all when you were kids. Bruh, I was there. Story 46. She lied about 2 pregnancies, claiming she had a son, but she was babysitting someone else's child for money. Story 47. My ex insisted that air was mostly oxygen. When I looked it up in front of him, he said the entire internet was wrong, accused people of lying in a conspiracy, and insisted I should believe him over random sites. Dodged a bullet. Story 48. My cousin does not invent crazy stories, but he embellishes details and contradicts everything. If I say it is illegal to drive on the left side of the road, he will invent a story about a nearby town where it is legal but no one knows about it. He argues earnestly and insists it is a mental illness. Story 49. My aunt planned to go to Woodstock but did not attend. Story 50. I worked with a guy who claimed he worked for a surveying company. They gave him an unlimited budget, built up a 4-wheel drive vehicle, and he surveyed the whole Great Dismal Swamp. When you realize someone is a compulsive liar or a one-upper, it's actually kind of fun. We used to invent ridiculous stories just to see what he would say to try to top them. Our running joke was that if he had done everything he claimed, he would be about 154 years old. Story 51. The receptionist at the nursing home where I worked in high school was the sweetest girl, but an absolute pathological liar. Her biggest tale was that she was a princess from Thailand whose family fled persecution and came to Canada. This was in the late 80s, so there was no real way to verify any of it. Story 52. My husband's former roommate told me he owned a $500,000 house and was a landlord with multiple properties. The truth was he was a drunk loser who lived in a trailer. Story 53. My ex-boyfriend used to sell his belongings to pay gambling debts and then invent stories to explain their disappearance, saying he had been robbed at knife point, scammed online, or that his house had been broken into. There were other stories I cannot think of right now, but he never called the police to report any of these crimes. Story 54. I knew a woman who would lie about anything, even what she had eaten at her last meal. It made no sense. Story 55. There were so many. The first that came to mind was the woman who claimed to be Charles Manson's daughter, which was theoretically possible but extremely unlikely. Another man told me about a wild night he had in New York City and an act he had seen in a strip club. Unfortunately for him, the story was copied wholesale from a William Burroughs routine, and I recognized it straight away. Story 56. I have a cousin who met a man and left her husband and 3 children to be with him. He left his wife and 3 children to be with her. At her mother's funeral, she was talking to the preacher. He asked if she had any children, and she said no. I was standing right next to her and said, "What about the 6 children you have between you?" Needless to say, she was not very happy. Story 57. I knew someone who had done a single ride-along with an emergency medical services crew as part of her training for something else. I did not remember what, and it was not medical. She was not a medical professional. She claimed that on that ride-along they had picked up a woman in active labor, taken her to the hospital, and then had to wait so long for a room that the storyteller caught the baby in the waiting room and, when the nurses came in, handed the infant to them, grinning and saying, "All done." Anyone who has worked in emergency medical services or in a hospital immediately knows this is not true. So many aspects of that story are impossible. The odd thing was that she told me this at a dinner, knowing I had been a paramedic for years and would recognize the lie. Story 58. I dated a man who constantly told the most ridiculous lies in the most natural way, as if he believed them himself. The lies were never malicious or manipulative, so I accepted it as a slightly amusing quirk. First, he told me he was a player in the National Hockey League. He worked at McDonald's full-time in England. He pointed out a brand new model of car that had just come out and said he was going to buy one for his father's birthday. Good luck doing that on your McDonald's wages. He said he was a model for Yves Saint Laurent. Now, don't get me wrong, he had a very handsome face, but he was 5'6". Yves Saint Laurent would not have had that. He said he was a semi-professional boxer. I cannot prove he wasn't, but I knew him for a couple of years and he never had a fight in that time. My favorite, though, was that he played for one of the top non-league football clubs in England. The club he spoke of was full-time. Their players were employed there as their main job. The club was 100 miles away from the town we lived in and worked in. Crucially, this football club was in the same division as the team I support and for which I attend all home and away matches. That season, we were coincidentally drawn against them in 2 different cup competitions, one of which was a draw and required a replay. We therefore played each other 5 times that season. Guess who did not feature in the squad? When I asked him about this, he told me he had been injured but was now recovered. They just would not pick him for the team because he was so good he would upset the other players. Asked what position he played, and apparently he was not only their star striker but also their best goalkeeper, all 5'6" of him. So I did what was natural in that situation. I challenged him to a penalty shootout, professional striker and goalkeeper against a 5-foot-tall teenage girl. I beat him 15-0. Story 59. One man claimed to have served in special forces and said he had been a Bush League baseball player. Another man at my condominium gym said he had been an officer in the Vietnam War. When I asked where he went to officer training school because he did not seem like military academy material, he said he could not remember. He also said he had gone to Berkeley. Story 60. I knew a girl who claimed she had a beloved younger brother who died when they were children. It really messed her up. She said the tragedy destroyed her parents' marriage and ruined her youth. She had a photo of the headstone prominently displayed. Turned out it was all made up. She had always been an only child. Story 61. My ex talked often about being on a baseball team as a kid with Luke Bryan and going to his open mic nights when he was getting started. It was not until after we broke up that my roommate told me they had gone to high school together. Then I looked up their ages. He was 10 years old when Luke Bryan was 18. There is no way they could have played on the same baseball team as kids. That was only one of many lies I found out about. Story 62. He was so wildly insecure that he had to know everything and be the best at everything all the time. Some friends told about when he insisted he was really good at soccer and the pickup game went hilariously badly. The one that cracked me up most was that he constantly insisted he spoke many languages. He had done years of German in school but could only say Gesundheit. And his biggest brag was that he was pretty fluent in Latin, which is hard to check because nobody speaks Latin. We were at dinner and someone said, "Oh, you read Latin? What does this say?" And showed him a piece of jewelry that said, Dux Femina Facti. He hedged that the grammar made it hard to translate exactly and guessed something about the Duke's wife and facti. Maybe his factotum. I have some familiarity with Latin because I studied theology, so I can half stumble through church Latin and I know a handful of famous quotes. I said, "It means a woman was the author of these deeds." Everyone looked at me like I had 2 heads, and I said defensively, "It's in the Aeneid. It's about Dido. It's a favorite feminist quote. Google it." He was absolutely seething with rage. I literally thought he was going to murder me. I thought my feat was no more impressive than knowing the National Aeronautics and Space Administration's motto is, "To the stars through adversity." It's just one of those bits of Latin a lot of people have memorized. I can't tell you anything about the grammar or construct a sentence. Story 63. He lied about his degree and even photoshopped a fake certificate with his name. After a while, his family revealed that he was a pathological liar. Story 64. In the early 1990s, my 20-year-old cousin began telling people he had served in the Vietnam War. Story 65. Sorry, I can't provide graphic descriptions. Where to start? Maybe the one about an accident where a vehicle went under a semi-trailer. The driver was killed and the passenger tried to help. Story 66. They ate monkey brains with a prince. It's a long story, but he had a beautiful head of hair. Story 67. I knew a man who faked Tourette syndrome and several serious mental health conditions to sleep with women and to excuse his lack of accountability. Story 68. I had a boss like this. Her father must have been a cat. We heard 9 different stories about how he died. We also heard conflicting stories about her childhood. She gave conflicting ages, mid-40s, early 40s, late 30s, though I found she was actually in her mid-50s. She claimed to have played Trivial Pursuit with Donald Trump and to have flown on a plane with Al Pacino. The first time I met her, she said her husband worked for Robot Chicken and that Guillermo del Toro and Seth Green had been at her rural Midwestern house that weekend for the show. She claimed to be Native American and cultivated a persona around it, though she appeared to be a white woman from the Midwest pretending to be Native American. I cannot remember all her stories, and I will not share some of them publicly. She was a habitual liar and a con artist who did not do her job. It was all smoke and mirrors, and we have spent years uncovering and cleaning up the messes she left behind. Story 69. I worked with a guy who was always late and always had an excuse. A couple of weeks earlier he told me, "If you are ever late, just say you were pulled over by the police but were let go." The following week he showed up and said, "Sorry I'm late. I was pulled over but they let me go." I replied, "You already told us that excuse last week, dummy." Story 70. I dated him for 3 years. His friends had warned me at the beginning of the relationship that he was a pathological liar, but I did not think they were serious. He once lied about what he had for breakfast, even though we had eaten together. Story 71. He pretended to be Scottish, to have served in the British military, and to have terminal cancer. When he could no longer keep up the lies, he killed himself. Story 72. I worked with one. The funniest moment was when he told me a story from my youth that I had told him. Story 73. He said he had Parkinson's disease, so he could not carry food trays to tables at work. He said he used to go heli-skiing in Alaska every year. He said his ex cheated on him with a member of the band Daughtry and then became a groupie of theirs. He hated that band, and every time one of their songs came on he asked us to change it. He was dating a coworker and said he had bought her a vacation to Mexico in 2 months. The night before the flight, while she was packing, she had doubts. He swore up and down they were going. The next morning, before leaving for the airport, he admitted there had never been a trip to Mexico. She left him and he quit working with all of us. Story 74. A coworker once told me he had gone for a walk in the forest on a majestic day. He found a clearing where a deer was grazing. At 5 feet 8 inches and 170 pounds, he crouched low, snuck up on the deer, leaped and grabbed its antlers. He rode the buck through the forest for what felt like an eternity, about 6 minutes. When it tired, he jumped off, patted its back, said "good deer," and went home to smoke weed and play video games. Story 75. My parents used to live next door to someone like that. He claimed to be a major airline pilot, then an investment banker, and later a medical doctor. He also said he had been in medical school full-time for 7 to 8 years, apparently unaware that most medical programs last 4 years, and he never moved on to a real medical career. Eventually, his fiancée got sick of his lies after an incident in which he was pulled over by police for illegal highway racing and lost his car and license. Within 3 months, they moved out, sold the house, and went their separate ways. Story 76. She was one of the smartest women in the United Kingdom and earned almost full marks on all her advanced level examinations. She went to Cambridge University to study mechanical engineering. She was a kind person, so no one had any reason to think she would lie. She invented a whole other social life, complete with a boyfriend and a friendship group that did not exist, and we believed it for years. After a year or two, inconsistencies emerged and her story unraveled. It was so disappointing that I could not see her the same way afterward. Story 77. 17 years of anguish with a stepdaughter I loved but could not fix and could not escape. I think people either justify lying to themselves or, in many cases, come to believe their own lies. I have never seen anyone blatantly lie with tears streaming down their face, and I spent years looking foolish for believing her again. Despite it all, I loved her deeply, and she was a good person underneath it all. Story 78. Woman about 40, now a hairdresser. She says she dropped out, then spent 7 years touring with a band, although there is no mention of this band online. She later became a pastry chef, earned a psychology Bachelor of Arts or Master of Arts, and says she worked as a counselor, then obtained an Associate of Arts in Forensic Medicine and worked in bartending, coffee, and ice cream shops. She has been a hairdresser for 10 years. Story 79. My friend dated an older man when we were in our 20s. I did not like him much, but whatever. He built much of his identity around being a Vietnam veteran. My uncle worked for the Return Services League and maintained a database of return veterans because of this issue. My friend's partner was not in that database. Story 80. My mother insists my grandmother prevented her from going to the Olympics out of spite. She took one summer of gymnastics as a child. Story 81. I had trouble getting a girl from high school to look me in the face and apologize. She said she had spent the day with my boyfriend, but I had been with him all day. It was the first time someone had told me a bold-faced lie. I almost doubted my memory, wondering if it had been yesterday, but it had been. There was nothing wrong with me. Story 82. A man I went to school with claimed he had been shot in the chest during a gang altercation, had technically died, and spent months recovering in the hospital. We were in London, where gun crime is very uncommon. No one remembered him taking months off school. We were both very middle class at a fancy private school, and not living in areas where gang crime occurred. Neither of us could name a single London gang. He said it was a miracle it had left no scar. Story 83. I worked with a man at Hooters, the restaurant known for its chicken wings and female servers. He repeatedly told us he was a former Special Forces operative who conducted covert operations in Turkey, was shot 5 times with a Kalashnikov assault rifle, and whose service in the United States military affected his mental health. He also claimed he was so skilled with a katana that he could cut his name into my chest blindfolded. Story 84. A girl at my high school told everyone she was pregnant and near her due date. She did not look pregnant, but I gave her the benefit of the doubt. She later said she had lost the baby and created a GoFundMe page for the girls at school to contribute to. Because she was known to lie, only one person donated $5. She later told me in private that she wanted attention. I cut her off then and there. Story 85. My late brother-in-law was a pathological liar. Most of his family stories were not entertaining, but he became upset when someone joked about the captain of the Challenger shuttle, claiming he knew the captain personally and that the captain had called him right before liftoff. Story 86. My friend told me he had gone on a pilgrimage to Auschwitz as a teenager because his mother was Jewish and his grandmother had been in a concentration camp and had the camp identification tattoo. None of that was true. He grew up poor in an impoverished neighborhood. I met him at 17. He did not have the money to travel to another country for a pilgrimage. Story 87. His friend worked as a courier, transporting experimental ocular fluid to restore people's sight. Story 88. My mom claimed she was allergic to bones, live fish, and eggs. She collected allergies like Pokemon. Funnily enough, one of her favorite foods was quiche, and she ate it at least once a week. Story 89. A man would get drunk and call himself a pathological liar. When someone called him a liar, he would scream, "I'm not a liar." Story 90. A kid I grew up with claimed he had an in-ground pool in his basement. His father did not like kids using it. Story 91. My dad told his coworkers at a celebratory dinner for his 25th work anniversary that he was putting me through college. My sister was with him. His total contribution was about $225 between 1990 and 1995. It would be great if that were all it cost to go to college, but even back then it was not. Story 92. There was a man in an adjacent unit of mine in the Army who would not stop lying about having Central Intelligence Agency qualifications and credentials. Even when it was explained to him that all his claims could be easily verified, that no position would be hidden or redacted from his commander, and that he would not be near the rank required for such a position, he still lied. Even Delta Force operators have that information clearly visible on their records. His lieutenant eventually reprimanded him, warning that if he told one more lie he would face legal consequences. After the reprimand, the man muttered something like, "They erased all my records." The lieutenant heard him and pursued legal action. Fortunately, that was the last I heard about him. Story 93. The 2020 election was stolen. I have a health care plan. It was a perfect phone call. The economy is the best ever. The economy is Biden's fault. I barely knew Epstein. Story 94. My friend lied about owning a Theraface mask for red light therapy. Why would they do that? Story 95. A woman told me she was tattooed by pagans against her will. She also said her house burned down because her dog chewed on a cord. When she showed me her photo album, it was the one thing that survived the fire. A man told me a neighborhood crow brought him a diamond necklace, which he posted as found online and returned to the owner. Story 96. A man I know was told he had 2 years to live. He made a huge deal out of it. Several years later, he is healthy and very much alive. Story 97. I knew a man who claimed he was assigned to Fort Oglethorpe while in the Army. The problem is the installation closed in 1947. He was not born until 1963 and entered the Army around 1982. From then on, I knew he had lied about many things. Story 98. I feel it's a Pan-American experience to know a boy who swears he learned how to kill people with his bare hands at his strip mall karate class. I'm not sure why that exists, but I wonder whether middle school Ronins still exist for Generation Alpha. Story 99. My dad openly claimed in court that he had graduated college and held multiple degrees. He attended less than a year and dropped out, so he did not have any degrees. Story 100. A man I dated told me that he and 2 other men owned a race car hidden in an underground garage. He said the car was used to race on an underground track that only the elite could attend, and that you had to put up $10,000 just to watch. He worked in a furniture store, yet imagined himself a poor Bruce Wayne. I still make fun of him to this day. Story 101. He worked for the Central Intelligence Agency, the Russian mob, the Mossad, and other foreign intelligence services. He made jewelry for A-list celebrities, went to the Grammys with his inexpensive brass designs, and the celebrities wore them on the red carpet. He used to run his own multimillion-dollar business. He was a trip. Story 102. Not super insane, but a conversation that stuck with me. At the time of the movie Project X about a huge house party, she told me she also goes to those kinds of parties. At one of those parties, she was in a large house and jumped out of a window into the pool. Because she always made up stories, I asked if I could join. No, you wouldn't like it. The people are pretty rude. Oh, I don't mind. I'm pretty sure I'd have a good time. Oh, but I can't take you. I always go with this guy on the back of his motorcycle. Okay, just send me the address. No, it's a secret. Well, do you have pictures? No, it's mostly people from my study, and we need to keep a good reputation. It was a photography study. Story 103. My stepdaughter Dee sadly inherited mental health issues from her mother's side. In high school, Dee announced in class that she had been accepted to a prestigious university although she was only a junior with a 2.0 grade point average at the time. She claimed to have lupus, researched a local specialist, and said he was her doctor. He was her aunt's doctor. That aunt actually has lupus. The aunt asked the office manager if Dee was a patient there, and she was not. She claimed to have breast cancer at age 20. She said her mother had allowed her to travel to Samoa with a friend, but she did not have a passport. She lied about having auto insurance for 9 months. She told people her father had died of brain cancer. He is alive and has never had cancer. She became pregnant and claimed to be receiving prenatal care, even naming a specific obstetrician-gynecologist and knowing where their office was. A relative insisted on accompanying her to an appointment, and they went to the reception desk before Dee admitted she was not a patient there. Story 104. Had an old neighbor who made things up all the time. For context, we had moved to a brand new housing development, and after all the work had finished and the lawns had grown, my dad took the initiative and got all the neighbors together to put up fences. He had a friend who owned a fencing company, did all the math and figured out how much everyone would owe, and he even ate the difference when he realized he had made some mistakes. One of our neighbors, Ray, was always making up lies. He claimed they used to own a restaurant, that he had been a paramedic, that he made his money selling sports cards and so on. One day, months after the fences went up, Ray mentioned to my dad that Tom, my dad's friend who did the fences, had gone through a tough time because of his divorce and that Ray had let him sleep on his couch for about a month and a half. My dad knew it was nonsense and called Tom, asking playfully where he got the nerve to live 3 doors up from us for over a month and to never stop by. Tom was so confused by the story, the only thing he could say was, "Who the hell is Ray?" Story 105. They said we should inject bleach to kill coronavirus disease 2019 and that one day it would disappear like a miracle. Story 106. I was friends with someone for 20 years before we dated, and it became hell very quickly. I mentioned her sister who had died when she was much younger, and her face went completely blank, as if she did not remember. She had lied to me about a deceased sibling to garner sympathy. This was one of many disturbing lies and fabricated narratives she invented all the time. She also lied to me about our life together. Once she said, "My family keeps wondering why I am paying all these bills here and not getting to use the space I need." And I had to blink. She paid nothing toward bills, utilities, or internet, and at that point she had barely paid rent for months. She was making me foot the bills while telling her family otherwise and then using that on me, as if I was unaware. It was so strange. She told me I was denying her experience with facts. I laughed. I wish I were making this up. I actually have that one recorded. Anyway, liars are creepy, and they inevitably forget their own lies. It would be funnier if she were not so harmful. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.